Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another of GVHA's Waterside chat. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, specifically the Esquimalt Nation and Songhees Nation, whose relationship to the land and the harbor continue to this day, and we're very honored and proud to work with them. Again, good afternoon. My name's Ian. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority. And I'd also like to introduce Kyle Armstrong. Kyle is our environmental coordinator. And before I begin, I'm just wondering if, and a couple of things here is, for technical reasons, I can't see the Q&A on the screen that I'm in right now. So I'll be looking over here to my left to monitor your Q&A. And by all means, please send any questions you've got in through the Q&A and throughout the session that we've got with Kyle. We will do our best to answer all the questions that come in. So before we begin, Kyle, I'm wondering if you could just start off and tell us a little bit about yourself, like where did you grow up? What's your favorite hockey team? And where did you get your post-secondary education?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Ian, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the environmental program at GVHA, and thanks to everybody for tuning in and for your interest in listening. A little bit about myself. I grew up on the Sunshine Coast, a little town called Secret Cove. I kind of grew up on the coast my whole life, and at the ripe age of 18, moved over to the island and went to school at the University of Victoria, studied environmental studies. And after graduating with that, I went on to work on a variety of different positions in all coastal British Columbia, in conservation, ecological restoration, but as well as different industries of ecotourism, even oyster farming and some industries like that up in Quadra Island. So I've been kind of around the coast and doing these things, and recently went back and got my master's in science in ecological restoration from BCIT and SFU, and then moved back to Victoria after kind of doing a lap around the Salish Sea. So it's good to be back here, and it was really exciting to see an opportunity to work with the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority. And I guess the interest in sustainability just comes from anyone who's worked on the coast or lived on this coast. You see the beauty and you see the wealth, and you want to do something to protect it or help. And I think that's where my interest came from.
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, we're certainly glad that you picked us and that you're with us. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about what drew you to environmental sustainability. What was the attraction, and maybe when did you start? How old were you, or when you started to kind of figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been interested in nature. Growing up in the Sunshine Coast, just exploring and in the backyard and stuff. But yeah, the university was kind of one that really accelerated. The environmental studies program at the University of Victoria is really great and offers a really great window into kind of a lot of the different issues, and does a good job of educating that. I started down the route of anthropology and was really interested in social ecological systems and kind of that interface between people and nature, and looking at our impact and essentially how you can shift that impact. And that's kind of from there, that interest just grew, and along with kind of the global interest, and so it's been really a feedback, and it hasn't always been easy, but the opportunities seem to be growing in that field, and as more and more kind of industries and people become aware, and yeah, it's an exciting time to be in this industry and looking at environmental sustainability.
Well, I know you joined us right before COVID. You were kind of our pre-COVID hire, and what a time to join us or any organization, just right before COVID hit. But what was it about the opportunity at GVHA that interested you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I for my master's project, I did some research in the Fraser River estuary and looked at kind of ecological restoration and busting down some dams. And a lot of my ecotourism experiences brought me to some pretty remote areas along the coast, and really beautiful kind of untouched estuaries and coastal ecosystems. And coming back to the Fraser River estuary and working in that kind of environment, you look at it and you look at the potential of what was, and you know, you can kind of look around and just envision what this estuary might have been, and could still potentially be. And that really kind of spoke really deeply to kind of this interest in looking differently at these kind of urban waterways that have, you know, been heavily industrialized and heavily polluted, and looking at the opportunity of recovery for these places. And that's really inspiring for me, and you know, and I think for a lot of people in Victoria is that kind of narrative of recovery and restoration in the harbor. So, you know, speaking with the GVHA and looking at the opportunity, there was this kind of opportunity to join in at a, you know, really, you know, a great organization that you know, cares a lot about their environmental sustainability, whether it's economic, social, or environmental. And yeah, it looked like a really good fit to just kind of step in and just kind of see where it could go.
Well, like I said a couple of minutes ago, you know, we're really glad that you're with us. So why don't we dive in? You know, you and I, before this, we touched upon some subjects and some topics that we could kind of dive in a little more that might be interested to those that are listening in. So why don't we get just right into it? Now, let's talk a little bit about Green Marine. Maybe tell us a little bit about who Green Marine is. And we were really proud of the fact that back a few months ago, we scored 3.7. And, you know, 3.7 out of 5, it's kind of like a C plus. It doesn't sound great, but from what you were telling me and from what I've learned, you know, 3.7, I mean, obviously gives us room for improvement, but it's something that we can be proud of. So maybe tell us a little bit more about what it means and how it fits in overall within the GVHA environmental program.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. And I think Alicia, one of our verifiers, and Eleanor, our kind of regional head for the program, is tuned in, I think. Hello. Try not to mess it up too bad, but Green Marine, I'm glad we're talking about it, because it's a really great program that I wasn't aware of until kind of starting the position. The GVHA, of course, has been a member for a number of years. And you know, taking over the portfolio, well, first of all, Green Marine, just a quick background, is a voluntary environmental certification program for the marine industry and operations and corporations and organizations within the marine industry to kind of strengthen their environmental performance. And they use a whole criteria of kind of environmental performance indicators that are constantly updated and are kind of designed, and you know, a lot of work goes into creating these performance indicators and keep them relevant. So, you know, they're constantly reworked, constantly changed, constantly added to ensure that they really are setting a really strong, high standard for environmental performance. And essentially, you fill out these self-evaluations going through your operations, and then I think every 2 years you have a verifier come in and they kind of take a look at what you did and, you know, make sure it's all up to snuff, and then you get your score. Hopefully that's a okay description. Please feel free to go to their website and learn some more information, because I really do believe in this program. But for myself personally, stepping into the position and this Green Marine program portfolio, it was a really excellent, basically, crash course in, you know, GVHA environmental performance. And you could go through and basically see where we are, you know, right where we are, look at all the different projects that we have that are incorporated into this. And it was just a fantastic way to get completely up to speed with where GVHA is, and then provide a really great roadmap for where to go. And I should mention that, you know, it's for our port property, or the Breakwater District,
Yeah.
Ogden Point, but it really does extend into a lot of other sustainability aspects of the organization. It really does kind of cover a lot of the other aspects of our organization as well.
So you know, you touched upon a point, because I often get confused around this. There's Green Marine and Clean Marine. Can you tell me? And I as I'm learning, Green Marine applies to our operations pretty much at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point, whereas Clean Marine is more around our marinas. Is that correct? And what's really the difference? And why do you think there's two? And why isn't there just one?
Yeah, I think that's pretty apt. you know, it's the Green Marine program is really tailored, and it's joint, I should mention as well, as a joint effort between us and Western Seaboarding, our terminal operator. And it is really around our port operations. There, of course, is always, there's there's overlap between many of our programs, whereas the Clean Marine focuses strongly on our marina facilities, and really has a strong focus and the criteria for marinas and marina operations. So they're slightly different, but there is a lot of overlap. And I should mention Clean Marine is a Georgia Strait Alliance initiative. It's kind of more local. But just, you know, really a great program as well. And I think they're turning 20, they're celebrating a decadal milestone recently. So, you know, and I think they have all sorts of events lined up. So make sure you tune into those as well. And a little bit about our Green Marine score. Sorry, I forgot to mention that and why that's important. It's just, 3%, you know, it doesn't sound super great. You compare it to kind of the average across North America, and I think it's around 2.7, 2.8. And as well, you know, it's a building on our previous score of 3.3. And, you know, I'm proud of that score because it really is a bar that continually moves. It's a moving target, and you really do need to work to continually improve. So, and they always add new categories. The most recent, or one of the most recent, was the underwater noise management category. And so once, you know, you kind of get this new category, and you start at a baseline again. So then you have to rebuild that and improve there.
So do you think what I was going to maybe next talk about is, you know, where are the areas for improvement? Like, how can we go from, you know, a 3.7 and strive to be on the, you know, the other side of 4? Is it around noise monitoring, which was just included in the criteria?
Yeah, and absolutely. I think currently we went from a 1 to a 2 in underwater noise management, and that's just from kind of being involved with a lot of the conversations happening around southern killer whale populations, and just kind of, you know, really just kind of complying and sitting at those tables and having those conversations. So plenty of room there to grow and develop an underwater noise management plan, and you know, actually take some measures to look at our impact there. We had a slight slippage, I believe, in spill prevention. And that was kind of due just to some inconsistencies in reporting on our end historically. So, you know, we're going back, we're looking at that, and we're building that program out. And yeah, that I'm excited about that, is specifically as it pertains to stormwater management. I think, you know, we have some opportunities to really bolster that area within our organization, and I think it'd be really great.
All right, fantastic. Again, just for those who may have joined us, you know, feel free to add your questions in the Q&A portion, and I'm going to be looking over to this screen to just check and see how those Q&As are coming in. So if you see me look across, I'm not checking email. I'm just checking to see if any Q&A coming in. All right, Kyle, maybe let's shift gears a little bit. And an area that gets a lot of attention for us, and also a lot of focus, is around controlling emissions. And maybe you could just talk about, you know, what progress has been made in terms of controlling emissions, and what do you think should be the future plans for targets and those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of where I'd like to introduce our third program within the GVHA, which is the Climate Smart program. We've been a member of that. So we have the Green Marine for our port, we have Clean Marine for our marinas, and we have Climate Smart for sort of our corporate emissions. And they all work to kind of overlap and feed into each other. And again, it's been really great for myself to kind of use these programs to get up to speed with the GVHA, as well as map out a kind of future route. And, you know, as far as coming into the organization and looking at what we've done, it was really great to see. We had a really strong kind of past couple of years with lots of really big initiatives that have worked to kind of reduce our emissions, as well as lay a really strong foundation for reductions in the future. So, you know, a big job of mine will just be to kind of continue that and kind of push that forward. You know, and some of these things that we've been doing, you know, we've had well, basically with our corporate emissions and what we've seen under our Climate Smart program is a 30% reduction over the past decade in our footprint. And that's really great considering how much growth in our operation we've seen, and as particularly around crews and what we're responsible for. So that's a pretty strong number, and I think a lot of hard work has kind of come into that over the years from the GVHA team. So it's just a huge kudos to them for that, as well as for all the environmental initiatives and performances to date. There's been a lot of hard work from a lot of different people. Some of these initiatives, we've made some good strides in adding electric vehicles to our fleet. We've done a lot of building and site retrofits to our facilities to make them more efficient and reduce kind of our consumption there. We've also introduced a composting program down at Fisherman's Wharf that not only is good for just kind of zero waste and eliminating a lot of single-use plastics, it also works to reduce landfill waste, which is quite heavy on the emissions side of things. And as far as laying that foundation, as we've done some work with Synergy in getting that emissions inventory complete, which looks at emissions from that period, an 8-year period, I believe, 2010 to 2018. And we had that since 2019, and have been able to kind of pursue and target where we can make some really, really large emission reductions potentially in the future, which, as has launched this shore power case study.
Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit more about the shore power case study and what you know about it, and kind of where you see the next steps going. I mean, there's more on that, and we can talk a little bit more about it, but why don't you just maybe talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So, the emissions inventory that Synergy provided essentially identified, over 90% of the carbon footprint at our port facility at the Ogden Breakwater District at Ogden Point is from crews. And of that 90%, 60% of that comes from crews while they're at berth running their engines, also known as hoteling. So that's a huge portion of emissions that could potentially be reduced if we were to introduce infrastructure that could support shore power or cold ironing or plugging in, essentially. So with that knowledge in mind, we essentially launched the shore power case study, contracted Moffett and Nichols, the experts, to really take a look at some of the business case for it, as well as providing a whole bunch of different kind of scenarios. It's definitely a moving target with this one. There's a lot of variables that come into play. There's a lot of different scenarios that can work out, especially now with COVID and economics and fuel prices, technologies, investments, larger strategies from government and industry. So the bringing in the experts was really, a necessary call.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. I mean, we initiated this, I think, just before you started, and you've been playing a very active role in the process. And again, for those that are listening, we did engage Moffett and Nichol. We have received a draft report, and we'll be presenting kind of the report and along with our recommendations to our board on December the 4th. So more to come on that, but you're absolutely right. The significant majority of the emissions that Synergy identified were from the ships alongside, and so there could be an opportunity to introduce shore power, and we'll be taking a broader, more in-depth look at the business case and feasibility to do that. Okay, maybe again, just moving along here, in terms of I guess the overall umbrella of environmental sustainability, what do you see as being the biggest challenges for us, and how do you think we can rise to kind of meet those challenges?
Absolutely. And there are many, but then again, there's also many solutions and many opportunities as well. It's difficult to identify, the biggest challenges. Certainly the expected growth of the industry over the years and the different bodies, and the growth in shipping and cruise and development, and just in population as well. These are all huge challenges, and can be difficult to navigate and create solutions around and infrastructure around. And it's important to keep in mind, and something that kind of really I became aware of since joining the position is the role of the GVHA and our structural organization. We call ourselves an authority, but I think it's an interesting term, and one that I've kind of struggled to grasp with. I don't know if you'd like to speak to that further.
No. All kidding aside, you know what? I think it's interesting when I talk to a lot of people. I also get confused around the word authority, and I think it connotates some things that we're not. I often say to people, we don't have any control over the waterbed or the aerodrome. That's all under the auspices of Transport Canada. The water is the Harbour master, located here in Victoria. The aerodrome is controlled by NAV Canada. So, we own and operate about 130 acres of water and land property. So we're not really the authority. So it's interesting because we're not really a regulatory body, are we?
That's right. And so, with a lot of these environmental initiatives, you kind of lack that strength or, bite that in some cases you'd like to have. And, there's all sorts of, especially in Victoria Harbour, various levels of jurisdiction. There's so many interested parties, there's so many groups, there's so many levels. And it can be quite challenging to kind of navigate that and kind of figure out what exactly your responsibility is, our responsibility is, our role is, and how to best kind of push that forward without, upsetting anything or overstepping or understepping. But with that, there's a lot of opportunity there as well, because that's another thing I've come to realize stepping in this position is how many people are out there, working towards this end of kind of environmental sustainability or recovery within the harbor. And everyone, it's been really amazing when you kind of enter into those conversations and speak to people. Everyone has that in mind, and everyone's working to that in really impressive ways. And just there's so many organizations and people that are so very inspiring and strongly involved, and have an open door. And when you go and speak to them, they get really excited and want to bring you in. And I mean, that's been a difficult thing in these times with COVID, but there's so many different groups, so many different companies, so many different industries. I could sit here at a very high risk of forgetting a few and just rattle off all of these people. So I think working with those groups, working with those people to kind of communicate that and figure out, what the GVHA's role is, and kind of working with them to support that narrative of recovery within the Victoria Harbour, and doing and contributing and to that synergy is a huge opportunity. And it's almost like we just need to kind of be present and listen and act. And so with that, we're going to create and align, really ambitious goals with, the regional district and the city and the IMO and all these different organizations, around climate, around, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And, we're going to continue to establish these baselines and working with organizations to create really rigorous baselines and monitor those baselines in relation to our initiatives, our targets, our goals, and ensure that we report on it and adapt to achieve those.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is it's all about collaboration. I mean, it's a word that gets overused, but you're right. There's so many stakeholders in the harbor. And, you could say technically it's not our responsibility, but I don't think that would be appropriate for us. I think it's about collaboration, and it's more about, hey, here's some things that we're doing, come along with us and come and join us and collaborate. Would you say that's really what our role is, and where you see you steering us in that direction?
Absolutely, and not even come along with us, but like, may we join you? And those sorts of efforts as well. I think there's so many people doing so many wonderful things and so many opportunities. Synergies out there, creating really great kind of environments, and doing a really great job of connecting people and kind of acting on what their name suggests. There's so many, I can't even begin to say how many great groups there are. So yeah, just I would love to continue to work with those groups and have an open door with those groups and open communication and really just find those areas, and like you said, collaboration to kind of meet this goal which everyone has, which is just sustainability, especially in environmental.
All right, fabulous. Again, just a reminder for those that are with us, if you've got a question, use the Q&A function, and I'll be looking over to my left, your right, whatever, to check and see those questions that are coming in. All right, Kyle, let's move on to something that's obviously with us and everyone. It's around COVID. And maybe you can just share a little bit of your insight and observations in terms of what challenges and opportunities has COVID brought to us as an organization, and how are you, how are we navigating through those?
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, like you said, I joined right on kind of the brink of this all happening. So it's been a really interesting experience over the past almost year now. Looking at the havoc that COVID's caused and the hardships that it's brought to a lot of different organizations and people, especially economically. And so it can be a difficult time from an environmental perspective to kind of go to our partners and to these different organizations that we work with and kind of ask them to go above and beyond on some of these things, and as well as to our own leadership to go and say, hey, we need money to go do this or money to go do that potentially. And I'm sure a lot of organizations can relate to this. So yeah, it's been a challenge there. And again, I think it again comes to cooperation and that collaboration again, and leaning on each other. And for the GVHA, who's really we have an obligation to kind of keep these facilities and that interface to this beautiful kind of backyard region open and safe to people as a priority, but also not giving up and not kind of standing down from these environmental obligations that we have as well, and just making sure they get covered.
All right. Fantastic. We received an email from a resident, and I don't know if that individual's joining us today, but maybe I'll just fire off this email and read some of the questions, Kyle, that came through, and because it's really good questions. First question is, so it's talking about shore power, which is always a really topical item with residents and with us. I guess there's 4 questions here, and I mean, maybe I'll let you talk a little bit, and then I'll kind of jump in as required. But first question is, where would the closest BC hydro feed need to be to supply this substantial feed? So in other words, where would the substation be, and can we get power from that substation out to the Breakwater district at Ogden Point?
Yeah, and I appreciate Ron's questions. Brian was able to send them to me before the presentation, and so I appreciate that kind of heads up. Yeah. That's great. And really great questions. And as far as kind of the infrastructure of the substation and things like that, the famous response, it depends. It's kind of a big one, and it's something that I would defer to either you or Mark, someone with a little bit more understanding of the infrastructure requirements. I do know that they are significant going down the road towards shore power. The other thing I can speak to is that the Breakwater district at Ogden Point right now, as it stands for capacity for electricity, is pretty much capped out. We've been able to create some route on the grid by some retrofits and kind of our high mass project, where we kind of cut them down to size and put LED in there, which I know kind of took about 40% off the load requirements for those. So that created some extra capacity, but we're pretty much capped out. And going forward with the shift to kind of electric vehicles and a lot of electric demand kind of increasing, we do have to think about updating that infrastructure anyway. But the scale of that upgrade and timing is definitely dependent on that shore power question. So I hope that answers somewhat.
And I can jump here as well. And Ron, I think you're on. We appreciate you asking those questions. Well, I can tell you that we have confirmed with BC Hydro that there is enough power coming over to the island. We thought at one point that the power had to be brought in from the Topaz substation, but we have since confirmed with Hydro that there is sufficient power coming into the downtown core. It's a question from just connecting from downtown out to Ogden Point. So that's part of the feasibility that we asked Moffat and Nickel to look at. The other question Ron asked Kyle is, does the Coast Guard station have shore power to power their vessels?
And again, yeah, really great question. It's something that I'll probably have to follow up with you with, Ron, unless Ian, you're more aware. I do know that we've done upgrades to Pier A in the past at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point to facilitate to Coast Guard vessels such as the Cable Innovator to plug in regularly. They're often calling there and plugged into shore power there. But as far as kind of the other bases and their vessels, I'm not too sure about their capacity.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that the Coast Guard base doesn't have shore power, but certainly if we as an organization chose to pursue this, I got to tell you, probably the first phone call I would make is out to the base commander to say, hey, we're doing this. We're less than a kilometer away from you. Is there any interest in partnering with us so that power can be brought out to your base? So it's a great question. Another question, and I know we've talked a lot about this as an organization, Kyle, but the other question Ron asked is how many freighters that call in Victoria have shore power capability, and do they?
Yeah. And so for that question, just off the top of my head, I can't really speak to freighters, but with the Moffat and Nichols study and the synergy study and those scenarios, essentially the number that they're kind of coming out with currently right now is about 60% of cruise ships that visit our port have the capability to plug into some sort of shore power hookup. That being said, it's not always a one size fits all. So that would be kind of, we'd have to look into what kind of hookup we can have out there, how many hookups, as well as, and kind of so that we can accommodate as many of that 65% as possible, 60%, pardon me. That number is expected to grow. And again, by how much is only speculative, but, we can expect 85% potentially by 2030 and as high as 95% by 2040. So not quite 100% in the near future, but certainly a significant number of vessels. And our carbon kind of scenarios for the reductions are based on those kind of projections.
Okay. And just to finish off the last question Ron asked, maybe I could take this one, is Ron asked how many ports in the West Coast, New Mexico to Alaska, are equipped for shore power. And the answer is very few. But what I can tell you, Ron, is that globally, there are only 16 ports that have shore power. And we're talking about 16 of probably well over 360. Now I'm talking about ports that have cruise ships. So of the 360 odd ports across globally that welcome cruise ships, only about 16 have shore power. I do know that up and down the West Coast, quite a few do. So pretty much most of the ports in California, Vancouver, Seattle, and Juneau in Alaska has shore power. So again, evolving technology, and we'll kind of stay close to that. So again, if you've got any questions, please feel free to use the chat function, and we'll go from there. So Kyle, I'm wondering, since you've joined us, have there been any kind of aha moments, and any aha moments in a positive way, or even in not a negative way, but more of an opportunity area, like, oh, I thought we were doing this, or I thought this was done. I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, stepping into any organization is a great question. You always have kind of those moments where you kind of get taken by surprise. I think I've highlighted a couple of them. Just kind of, one was, just how much people care in the Victoria region about the environment in the Victoria Harbour, and how much is being done already. kind of, spearheaded by groups like Synergy and, and a lot of these NGOs that are around, and all the efforts that are going in there from, Friends of Victoria Harbour Bird Sanctuary, the Naturehood, the Peninsula Streams, and, even industry, some of our partners in industry like Timac and Pinwits and, Eagle Wing, just to name a very select few that are really, doing an incredible amount to kind of work towards, having a recovery within the harbor. That's been a really huge wake-up call, and just that openness to collaborate and speak to these issues has been fantastic. The other one, I guess, and I think you and I have had conversations around this as well, is kind of coming into the organization and not having a formal reduction policy for emissions, and kind of what that would look like, as well as kind of, a very firm grasp on what our footprint is and how that relates kind of, with so many different operators working and us as kind of this interface, what is exactly our footprint, and what do we need to take under our own responsibility, and sort of mapping out that operational control over those missions, and having a firm grasp on what those are and a target to reduce. So, we'll be working with and looking at kind of some of these other targets that have been set around us and within the industry and within local governments and other organizations, and really working to kind of tease out what that is and set those targets formally and pursue them. I totally agree with you. I think, we again, I'm a layperson. I don't know. I know enough about the environment to be dangerous, and I'm learning all the time. But you're right. The UN has come out with emissions targets, federal government, province, city, and you're right. I think that's a real opportunity for us as an organization to take all those into consideration. Think about what we can do, kind of what we can wrap our arms around, and say this is the emissions goal or the target that we're going to have for doing that. A couple of questions coming in, Kyle. So give it your best shot. How would you measure air emissions without considering how emissions from planes, helicopters, and other vessels are contributing, especially with regards to particulate matter? That's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
And it's definitely one that I can only say that we're struggling with. And working towards kind of coming up with a solution for that. And part of that comes into bringing an air quality monitoring program into this decade, and looking at kind of things like particulate matter and levels of that, and really kind of honing down what acceptable levels are. As far as kind of creating the regulation around that, that's one of the jurisdictional kind of gray areas for us, and it's really great to see organizations like the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, coming out with really strong regulations around ships for these emissions and reductions and targeting. So for us, for the near term, it's aligning with those organizations and what they're doing, and supporting and making sure we're in line with those efforts as best as we can. But it really is, it's a difficult question. And, we have the Aerodome, we have kind of, jurisdiction from, marine emissions, which is federal, but then also, increased traffic, which would kind of be, VIA and BC MOE and the Aerodome. So yeah, it's difficult. And that's part of that challenge of kind of figuring out what our role is and what our operational scope is, and creating targets around that.
Yeah, I agree. And I just to build on that, it really does come down to, our jurisdiction and what we can control. And I think it's really setting the targets, understanding what the emissions are around the area that we can control. And specifically the area we can control is what happens down at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point, Fisherman's Wharf and Inner Harbour. But there's no question that the significant majority of those emissions are happening out of the Breakwater District at Ogden Point. So that was part of the Synergy report, which is available on our website, to understand what we can control, what we can get our arms around, and then setting targets around what we can control.
Maybe I'll just add as well to that. Sorry, is that as far as the counting goes, I know it can be challenging to kind of count these, to measure emissions as they're emitted, and kind of on that scale. But there are really great tools coming out and being made available to us that, are using the best standards and factors to calculate emissions based on engine type and fuel type. And from that, you can kind of extrapolate, or at least get some understanding of kind of what those emissions are. And so that's what I'll be working towards doing, and we'll be working towards doing is implementing these tools that are available to us, either through Green Marine's emissions inventory tool, Climate Smart, and kind of using these tools to the best of our advantage.
Fabulous. I've got a question from Pat, and so I'll try and answer this one, and then maybe get you to build in on it, Kyle. Pat's asked, oh, hang on a sec, it went away. There we go. No, Pat didn't go away, but the question did. So here we are. What advantage is there to this is about shore power. What advantage is there to shore power, and who pays for it? So, Pat, I think the part of the answer is that the advantage of shore power is that when cruise ships come alongside down at the Victoria Cruise Ship Terminal, they will keep their engines running to run what's called their infrastructure or hoteling, to run all of the things along that need power along in the ship. And while they're doing that, we're seeing greenhouse gas emissions being emitted. And it was determined that a significant majority of GHGs could be saved and by plugging in and allowing the ships to plug in, which is done in a few other ports up and down the West Coast. In terms of who pays for it, that's a really good question. There's been different examples with the ports up and down the West Coast who have had it installed. I guess the one that I can look at is closest to us is in Vancouver. And I know when Vancouver put this in, it was kind of a third. It was a third from Port Metro Vancouver, a third from the province and feds, and then a third from industry. I can tell you that pre-COVID, a year ago or so, we reached out to the cruise lines, and there was significant interest from the cruise lines to help offset the cost of installation of shore power. That said, don't know where that situation is now. As you know, they're going through a real tough time. So, that'll be a big question that we have to grapple with, and one of the things that we'll be presenting to our board. Anything else you want to add on that, Kyle?
No, I think you covered it for sure.
Okay.
But other than that, that in the Pacific Northwest, we're kind of blessed with hydro energy.
Yep.
Which isn't perfect, but it is, from an emission standpoint, compared to fossil fuels, relatively cheap and environmentally friendly, quote unquote.
Okay. Let's talk about an event we had a couple of days ago, a king tide. Maybe you could tell folks what is a king tide, and why is it becoming more and more important that we monitor, we all monitor, not just GVHA, but we monitor king tide and rising sea levels.
Oh boy. explaining the tides is always a tricky one. The king tides, all our tides are essentially, as far as I know, lunar and kind of solar events, how the lunar and gravity, so the forces of the moon and gravity affect our tides. King tides are just a colloquial term for spring tides, these very large tide events that we get periodically. I think actually I'm not going to guess how many times a year, but it happens, particularly in winter and in this region, kind of lining up with a lot of these storm events that we get. And kind of why I guess this is relevant in contemporary times is things like ocean and sea level change with climate change, as well as kind of intensity in storms, is kind of creating a risk or a challenge for anyone who has coastal properties to manage, our infrastructure. So it's a challenge, and it's something we definitely have to keep our eyes on, and both in kind of a short term, like there's a storm and a tide coming, but also
Yeah.
in the long term, how are we going to plan our response to these sorts of things?
Yeah, I know. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the king tide we just had a few days ago, we were expecting a king tide of, I think, around 9.5 feet, but with the storm surge, it was around 11.5 feet. Did I get that right?
It sounds accurate. I know it's significant.
Yeah, and I know that it caused. There was a number of our staff that were involved in watching that very, very closely, and watching the impact that tide is having, what did have upon our properties. And thankfully, we survived that one with no damage. Now, I'm hearing there's another king tide. It's December 3rd or 5th, and I think it's expected to be around 10.5 feet. So we're going to have to keep our fingers crossed that there's not another storm surge that could push it even higher. So it's becoming more and more of a concern as we're seeing sea level rise happen, right across the globe. I see a question from Ron just asking around complementary land development at Ogden Point. Ron, I'm not certain about the word complementary. I can tell you that, for a number of years, this organization had been pursuing a master plan development for Ogden Point. And just about a year ago, our board made the decision to stand down on that development plan, partly because there's a significant amount of, still a considerable amount of environmental remediation that needs to happen, and we need to again wrap our arms around what's happening, what's going on there. And also at the time, the additional resources, financial resources, people resources that we were going to have to put in to move that master plan along just didn't make sense at that time. So we've paused the process. So that's kind of where we're at that point. Kyle, maybe one more question. Again, if you've got anyone that's online with us, if you've got a question, please use the Q&A function, and I'll see it over here and try and get the questions answered. Kyle, we got about 13 minutes left, but maybe one last question. Tell us a little bit more about the ocean health monitoring that you touched upon, and maybe you can tell us more about what that is and what you're working on.
Absolutely. So this is the Ocean Health Monitoring Program at GVHA is kind of undergoing a pilot study right now, and a pilot phase. It's in partnership with Ocean Networks Canada's Community Fishers Program, and we've essentially worked out a really great agreement where we can kind of use their equipment. They get an opportunity to test their equipment, such as kind of CTD devices or devices to collect various parameters of the ocean environment, as well as underwater hydrophones and software. They get to test and kind of ground truth this program with us out in the harbor. And in return, we get all sorts of really great data that can be put towards our management and better environmental management. I'd like to expand this program with various groups within the harbor to not only include kind of just ocean monitoring and underwater noise monitoring, but to really build an observation network between different groups and users of the harbor. And so if there's any iNaturalist users out there, we've created a Victoria Nature in the Harbor project within the app iNaturalist. And we're really interested to see what all of you are seeing out there on the water or on your walks around the harbor, or if you take a tour with any of the various whale watching or eco tour companies. We'd be very, very interested in, and it can be, a science grade citizen science app for you to collect data that can lead to better management. So I'm really interested in building that out with different users, including citizens and general public. So yeah, take a look for it on your iNaturalist app. If you don't have iNaturalist, download it and start taking pictures of all the wonderful nature you see out in this great naturehood of Greater Victoria.
Great. No, that's great information, and I hope that people that are online will take advantage of that. Just a reminder, I think we could probably wrap up. Don't see any other questions coming in right now, but just a reminder, If you want to reach out to Kyle or myself, please feel free to reach out to us at gvha@gvha.ca, and I see it's being posted in our chat box. Kyle, any closing comments or thoughts?
I just see in the comments that Christy from the CRD has mentioned that, or sorry, Christy from the City of Victoria, I believe, has posted that, a lot of these emissions that we spoke to earlier are captured in the CRD GHG inventory. So yeah, that's fantastic if people are interested as well as looking into that, and I'll certainly take a look. And yeah, there's so many, again, great groups and organizations doing wonderful things that we really just need to align with.
All right, fabulous. So listen, Kyle, thanks so much. It's really great. Really, like I said at the start, we're so lucky to have you with us. It's been a tough go with, getting into learning about us with COVID around us, but you're doing a great job, and we're so lucky to have you with us, and we look forward to your ongoing contributions. For those of you who, this is about our third Waterside chat. We've got another one coming up in December, where I'll be talking to David Roberts, who's the general manager of Pacific Northwest Transportation Services, to talk about what they're doing to modernize their fleet and to work with us in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions down at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for joining in, and wish you a pleasant weekend, and wear a mask. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.